Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Life in the Wildlands podcast, where we will discuss exciting opportunities with outdoor careers, share professional experiences, and provide advice to overcome the hurdles to federal employment. I am your host, Becky Schufelt, and today we have Katie Glick, who works for the Bureau of Reclamation in California. And she's going to share how she started her career with the Forest Service, how she obtained a permanent position, and provide advice for those that want to enter into the outdoor career field. Thank you for joining us, Katie. Thank you for joining us today, Katie. Go ahead and tell us more about yourself.
Yeah, sure. I work for the Bureau of Reclamation out of the California Great Basin office, which is in Sacramento, California. And so our region covers pretty much everything north of Bakersfield all the way up to the start of the Klamath River and then all the way out to the Utah border. So most of Nevada, most of California, and then just a notch of Oregon. And I am a grants management specialist.
Great. So can you tell us how you started your career with the federal government?
Sure. So I started applying for federal jobs way back in 2015, and I didn't get hired until 2017. And it was one of those where I had a decent job. I was working at auto dealerships, and it's a very difficult life working for car dealerships. And it took me a while to realize that I just really wasn't happy and it wasn't fulfilling to me. So I started looking for government jobs because I like being able to help people and I wanted that retirement security. And that's something you don't always get in the private sector. And I also wanted to be able to work anywhere I wanted to in case I wanted to move and to be outdoors. And so I initially got hired as a seasonal and tried a lot of different things before landing a permanent job. That, it took me a while to get to the point where I'm at working in grants, but I don't regret the path that I took at all because I learned a lot along the way.
So what was your first job with the federal government?
My first job was with the Forest Service and I got hired as a front desk person. And that's one of the things that I've found working for the federal government is to cast your net wide. So I applied for numerous different things, and that was the first one that picked me up. And I feel like that was the perfect position for me to start because I got to learn tons of different career fields within the federal government. Because as a front desk person, you're supposed to know a lot and have a varying knowledge of the land and different things that people are doing. So I feel like the perfect starting off point.
And from there, where did you go?
From there, I worked on a fire engine. That was initially what I wanted to do was to be in fire, but the front desk picked me up first. I worked on an engine up on the Plumas National Forest, and then from there, I went back to the front desk because they don't have seasonals usually working in the winter. And then I was a fuels technician after that. And that is you're more of a secondary firefighter in that type of position. So you're helping with fuels reductions, helping to clean up the forest. And my specific job was overseeing a fuels reduction crew. And so I would direct them on where to go and what projects they needed to work on.
And so it sounds like you spent some time as a temporary employee. So how long exactly did you serve in these types of temporary seasonal positions?
I was a seasonal from July of 2017 until May of 2020. So almost exactly 3 years. And I was unique that I worked year round. I didn't want to have to go look for outside employment. So I was lucky that I had the front desk skills, and front desk is needed year round. So I could go back to the front desk in the winter and then work in fire in the summer.
And so just to clarify, what is the duties of a front desk person for the Forest Service?
Front desk person is there, you're the face and the voice of the forest that you work for. So when people will call to ask questions, and you're the first person that they hear. So you're the one that they get the first impression of. and people will come into the office to do things like get permits, ask questions. There are products that we would sell, like fuelwood permits or mushroom picking permits, things of that nature, and even mineral gathering permits. We also sold park passes. A lot of people refer to them as the national park passes, but it's for all federal lands. So that's the primary duties, is and to direct people. Kind of sometimes you would feel almost like a travel agent, trying to help people plan their vacation. Where's the best place to go camping, the best hiking trails. And so it really helps to have a background knowledge of those things, but it's not necessary to have that job. That's kind of it in a nutshell. You're kind of the gateway to the forest for people, and a lot of times it's their first time in that area, and so they're very appreciative especially sometimes they're out of state or out of the country, and you're a vital resource to them.
Wow, that sounds like a really important job. And I know I've always had a lot of respect for the people that work the front desk, because you are the front line of the agency. You're the first person that, visitors will have contact with. So I think it's a really good, I would say, entry level position for a lot of folks that might be interested. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. Because like I said, people will ask you so many different types of questions. They'll ask questions about fires, if there's a fire nearby, and they'll ask you hiking, camping, wilderness questions, fishing questions, hunting. And so you are kind of, I don't want to use the word forced, but you have to learn a lot of different things. So I would quite frequently interact with the timber crew, with the fire folks, and with the biologists, because there's always going to be a question that you don't know. And the other employees at the office that you work at are your resource for that. So it really helps you to truly learn what the Forest Service is about. And I think versus some other seasonals that, might just be out in the field in timber, they don't necessarily get to know the other departments like the front desk folks do.
Yeah, that's great. It sounds like and I know already it's a pretty critical position. And I think a lot of folks don't realize that opportunity is there just to kind of get your foot in the door.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And there's not a lot of prerequisites. You don't need a degree to get into it. It's, I didn't have any federal experience when I got hired for that job. I just had some customer service background, and that helped me. But it's one of those where it's truly an entry level, but it's so vital. And like I said, I know that my journey would have been a lot different if I had taken some other job, because I got to learn so much as a front desk person.
So you worked as the front desk, then you got into fire and fuels in your temporary situation or your temporary positions. And now you're a permanent employee with another federal agency. So can you tell me a little bit more about that journey?
Yeah, so I would have loved to stay with the Forest Service. I feel like that's still kind of where my heart lies in a lot of ways. But the best opportunity for me at the time was to get a permanent job with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, which is, they do manage public lands, but they're not necessarily a land management agency. They're under military construction. And so it's a completely different environment from what I was used to with the Forest Service, which I liked that environment as well. But I had a similar job. I was basically like a front desk person, but instead of a forest, I was at a lake. So I had a much smaller area to learn, but I did virtually the same type of job. And I did that for a year until I found the position that I'm at now with Bureau of Reclamation. And it just seemed like a better path for me in the long run, because there was a lot more that I could do with it versus being a front desk person.
So throughout your career so far, do you have any experiences that really got you hooked into working in this type of career field, or an experience that really inspired you?
I feel like I feel like from my whole life it kind of led up to this point. I when I was a child, my parents owned a marina and it was on US Army Corps of Engineers land. So I feel like my background was unique to it, where I grew up around park rangers and fish and wildlife game wardens and CHP officers, all those type of people. They were, as a kid, they were the people that I interacted with the most because we lived far outside of town. So I didn't really get a chance to play with other kids as much outside of school. And so the Rangers, they were my friends. And so that I was truly an outdoor kid because I spent all my free time outside. I didn't have a PlayStation or anything like that, or a computer. And granted, this is the late 80s also, but I spent all my days climbing trees, messing around in the lake. So when it became time to look for a career, it just seemed natural to me to go toward an outdoor career because that's what I grew up with. And that's kind of my happy zone. But I remember specifically, I think it was 2016, and I was living in Southern California, and a wildland fire started behind my house up on the canyon. And I remember watching that and watching the helicopters, and I had done structure fire, but in a small town where we also responded to wildland incidents. And I remember watching all the activity and watching everybody do their jobs and thinking, I really, really miss that. And that really was a big drive for me to continue applying and not to give up and to eventually get my federal position. I think that was kind of like my final decision points. Like, yep, this is what I need to do. I'm tired of working in dealerships. I want to get back to an outdoor type job.
And so I know that you to work toward that permanent employee status with the federal government, you went through the American Conservation Experience Program. Can you tell us a little bit more than that?
Yeah, I forgot to mention that part. So that was my last winter with the Forest Service, and I had applied for it because I knew that I could get experience that I wouldn't have otherwise been able to do as a seasonal, because the position that I did through as an intern through the American Conservation Experience was one that they wouldn't have offered seasonally. It was generally a permanent position. So I got to work at a level that was a much higher grade than I was. And so I was an OHV manager type of position. So I helped with the recreation side, managing the dirt bike trails and the making sure the signs were up to date and helping with the kiosks to make sure the maps were correct and that people had the right information they needed to go out and enjoy their dirt bike or their ATV outside in the forest. And so that was a really cool experience, and it was really good for my resume also to work as that intern to be able to get my permanent position.
So in your experiences so far, working in temporary and permanent positions, why do you feel that the work that you have completed contributes to the overall public land stewardship?
I feel like that's pretty much every position that I've had. It's contributed in its own unique way. As a front desk person, you're helping people to learn where to go and also to be a responsible outdoor enthusiast and practicing leave no trace standards. So you're teaching people that, and a lot of times it's somebody's first time camping, their first time out in the wilderness, first time backpacking. So it's a good educational opportunity. And then working in fire and in fuels, you're truly caring for the land and protecting trees and resources and animals and things that can't speak for themselves. And you're also protecting archaeological artifacts and like old Native American grinding stones and things of that nature that they can't speak for themselves anymore. So you're really truly protecting the forest that you work for, and sometimes forests that you don't work for, And so that one, it's, absolutely invaluable to protect those resources. And my current position, it's one that I feel like not a lot of people know much about, but we provide funds. So a grant management specialist provides funding to nonprofits, universities, local governments, and sometimes other federal agencies for science and research. We also provide grants for fuels reduction, construction. A lot of our funds go to tribes, and they're making their local area a better place. And as I described earlier, my region is pretty vast, so I'm working on anything at a time from research for cancer in salmon up on the Klamath River to kit fox research more down in the desert area and the Great Basin of Nevada. And sometimes we do construction for people to improve their water filtration systems for, fuels reduction on Folsom Dam. There's so many different things that we provide funding for. And I feel like most of the time the public really has no idea what we do, but we do a lot, and we process millions and millions of dollars every year out of my region for grants.
So I'm assuming that you started off as a GS4 with the front desk and pay grade.
That's correct. Yes.
Yeah. So that's, for our audience, that's a pretty standard entry level position. And so, Katie, what is your pay grade now as a grants and agreement specialist?
Right now, I'm a GS5, about to be a GS7. At my last permanent position, I had gotten up to a GS6, but because of the career ladder that I'm in right now, I think that's the way you describe it, as the career ladder, but it's a GS579, so they couldn't hire me as a GS6. So I'm actually a GS5 step 5 and about to be a 7 in June. But with my job series as a grants management specialist, you could go all the way up to a GS15. There's virtually no cap on what you can do in this job series.
Wow, that's incredible. So all of your sorry, all of your really broad experience in these different fields really led you to where you are today. And because of it, now you are, in a career ladder type position where you are going to excel and keep developing your career at a higher level.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's nothing wrong with starting real low, and even if you don't go past the front desk, there's nothing wrong with that if that's what makes you happy. But I wanted to be able to excel and get climb the ladder, but not too fast. I wanted to take the time to learn my position and learn my agency and really get a good understanding of what I was doing before I move up.
Yeah, and that's always the advice I give folks is don't be in a hurry to climb the ladder, because the experience that you get from working these jobs that are more entry level in the field really help build a foundation of knowledge so that you, at some point, if you strive to be more in the management position, you will have a better skill set and knowledge of how to better manage the land, whatever resource that may be, in recreation or wildlife, botany, etc. And so I think it's pretty fascinating that, and I also think, yeah, it's very fascinating to me because you really were able to find a path much quicker than a lot of people do. I mean, myself, I spent 8 seasons as a seasonal before I got my permanent position. Mm-hmm. And so do you have any advice that you would give to somebody that's looking into getting into this type of career field as a person that's never worked for the agency before?
I would say definitely explore everything and anything that interests you. And, I know my background is pretty broad, the front desk, fire, and recreation, they're kind of related, but they're not, they're totally different career paths. But if it interested me, I applied for it. And I I was willing to try anything. And, like the OHV job, for example, I had no idea what that was when I applied for the front desk position. I think I actually applied for one as a seasonal that same year and I didn't get chosen for it, but it interested me because I'm kind of a gearhead. I love cars and trucks and all that. And um, so it was just a job field that interested me. And I would have tried being a summer wildlife biologist because I love animals and I love being outdoors. So I feel like anything that you find interesting, try it. And especially when you're a seasonal, you're only going to be in that position for a few months. And if you don't like it, you don't have to go back to it, but you have that experience on your resume. And if you try it and you love it, then you know that you can continue with it. You can try doing it for a few more seasons, try to get on permanent, maybe go back to school like I'm doing right now, and see if you can get a degree that would help you get that job permanently. And also, I would say do your research and research the position as much as you can. Also, research the area that you're going to be working because a lot of these outdoor type jobs are in extremely remote areas and it might be very different from what you grew up with, what you're used to, your day to day living. And so definitely research it, make sure you're going to be okay with that for a few months. And my other advice would be to be patient and just never, ever give up.
Is there any other information that you wish you would have known sooner that would have helped you further your career more quickly to obtain your desired career path in this field?
I kind of wish that I had known about this job years ago because I mean, I enjoyed my path with the Forest Service and I don't regret any of it, but I kind of wish I had known about this job sooner so I could have started planning for it because a lot of what I do has to do with public law and policy. And I kind of wish I had a little bit more background knowledge in it because a lot of it's a lot to take in at once. But I don't regret the path that I took. So, but I kind of sometimes I wish I knew what this job was sooner so I could have prepped for it. But like I said, it's one of those jobs that the general public usually doesn't even know that we do. You see rangers and firefighters a lot on the news, but you don't see people in my position or you don't hear about it that much. I'll tell a story with that. So the before I got hired with the Forest Service as a front desk person, I actually got offered a position to be on the Groveland hotshot crew, which is, the elite firefighting force. And they had given me that offer because I had prior knowledge, I had prior experience in fire. And I was absolutely terrified that was what they selected me for, was to be a hotshot. And it had been about 10 years since I had been in fire. So I had that at the back of my head, you're 10 years older, be careful and listen to your body. And I had no idea what I was getting into. And the first day we had to do the pack test, which is where you have to do 3 miles with a 45-pound pack and you have to do it in under 45 minutes. Otherwise, you're on the bus back home. You don't get to continue the position if you fail the pack test. And that was the first thing we did the very first day. And I failed it. And I felt like such a failure. It was just so embarrassing and mortifying. And I remember I couldn't even look my crew members in the eyes, especially, being a female. I felt like it was extra embarrassing that, they're probably thinking, yeah, she can't hack it. But I didn't give up. And even though I didn't get to start in that position, every week I went to my high school track and I ran 3 miles. And then I started doing it with weights and I kept doing it and I kept doing it and I kept doing it. And after I got hired at the front desk, which is a position that you don't need a pack test, you don't have to worry about that. But the division fire chief knew that I wanted to get into fire and he knew that I wanted to get into fuels, which would mean working for him. And so he gave me the opportunity to test with the district when they held the PAC test. And I had told him that I had failed and how mortifying that was, but he wanted to give me that opportunity, even though he didn't have to. And I came in third place out of everybody and that was testing that day. And I remember he was standing at the finish line. I was like, well, there you go. You could have done it all along. You just had to believe in yourself. And I remember I wanted to burst out into tears from happiness. And then the following year, then I did get the ability to work for him and be a fuels technician under him. And that was a very uplifting experience. So, like I said, never give up, even if you fail.
That's a very incredible story. And for those that are listening, I've done the PAC test more so in my earlier career, and it is not an easy task to get trained for. I mean, you really have to be fit. And so I would suggest, for anybody that's looking into getting into fire or even trails, working on a trail crew, start and make sure that you are in tip-top shape before you even start the job, because it will kick your butt if you don't. And then you go through the heartbreak of not passing the PAC test. And I've been there myself. And I just want people to know it's not a cakewalk. It's not a walk in the park. It's something that if you really want it, you got to strive for it.
Yeah, definitely. And I had to practice in my own way that worked for my height and the length of my legs. Because, doing it with guys that are 6'3", anywhere between, about my height up to like 6'3", 6'5". And so obviously it's easier for them because they're taller, and every step that they take, I have to take at least two to make up that same stride. And so I had to figure out a system where I could do it without overusing the muscles that I was struggling with. And so I would walk at a quick pace, and then I would up the pace for half a lap, and then I would go back to the slightly slower pace. So I just alternated my walking speed to make sure that I could do it comfortably and not fail at it again.
And I love your story because you really realized that you had to move around to get to where you needed to be. And that is something I tell people all the time. You can't get stuck in one ranger district or working in one location. You really have to be willing to make some sacrifices like you did yourself.
Yeah. And I would have, if I had, everything I wanted in my dreams as far as a federal job, I would have stayed in fuels. And I loved that job. I would have given anything to have done that job permanently, but they weren't hiring for that job permanently. And I think they didn't, that particular position I had, they didn't hire for it permanently until I think only about 6 months ago, and I left in 2019. So, that it's, you may look at your dream job and think, I want it so badly, but try other things also, because sometimes the funding just isn't there for that permanent job that you really want to open up. And I would have just, if I had just waited for that, kind of like waiting for your Prince Charming, if I had just kept waiting, I would have continued to be a seasonal, and I wouldn't have that job security and retirement security like I do now as a permanent employee. And that's invaluable, especially during, what we've just been through with the pandemic. And so even though I still would love to do that position, I'm very happy to be where I'm at now, because I do have a pretty cool job. I get to help local governments and tribes and do a lot of things that they wouldn't otherwise get the opportunity to do without the funding from Bureau of Reclamation.
Yeah, that's great. So I wanted to maybe circle back to your experience with the Army Corps of Engineers and the Bureau of Reclamation because,
Hmm.
I'm very familiar. I spent 21 years with the Forest Service. I know and are aware of the jobs that are available with the Park Service and the Bureau of Land Management, but not so much with these two other agencies.
Hmm.
So with the Bureau of Reclamation and the Army Corps of Engineers, it sounds like there are outdoor career opportunities. Can you share with us some other potential job opportunities that might be out there with these agencies?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I'll start with reclamation. So, Bureau of Reclamation, our main purpose is to manage water. We're actually the largest wholesaler, sorry, of water west of the Mississippi River. And so we do a lot in a lot of different states, but we don't exist nationwide. And at the lakes where the dams are, you have the park ranger positions. And so it'd be similar to what you would do with the Park Service. We're under the Department of Interior, just like the Park Service and Fish and Wildlife Services. And we also have um, biologists and archaeologists, people like that go out into the field more than I do, and engineers. So there are opportunities, not just permanently, but also seasonal. I know that the local lake near where I live, which is New Maloney's, is a huge lake. They have seasonal park ranger positions as well as permanent. So if it's something that you want to try, that's a great way to do it. And the Corps of Engineers is similar. They're very similar agencies in what they do as far as recreation and public land. So they have um, ranger positions as well. They just don't hire seasonally. It's only permanent. But with the Corps of Engineers, you're working for the Department of Defense. So you're a US Army civilian. You have the same kind of ID card that somebody that's in, we call it the big army would. So you have to have that in the back of your mind that it's a little different than working for the Department of Interior because you are part of the US Army. You're not enlisted, but you're part of the US Army. So there's definitely a different standard that you have to adhere to. And it's a lot of it's little things like you can't paint your nails and stuff like that. But you they have biology positions as well, archaeology, and obviously engineer positions. And the unique thing with the Corps of Engineers is you have the opportunity to work literally all over the world. Anywhere where there's an army base, you can work there. You can do a year-long deployment overseas with the big army. And, you know, sometimes that's in the Middle East and Africa and Asia. They exist anywhere. And so that's one thing that a lot of people don't realize with the Corps of Engineers. And the Rangers that I grew up with as a kid, they did lots of really great things, especially for children. They would do nature walks. I remember going on plenty of those and managing visitor centers. So a lot of things like a Department of Interior Ranger would do, but then you have the Homeland Security duties that the Interior Rangers don't.
That's really great information. I knew a little bit, but I really didn't understand, how those two different agencies really work. So thank you for sharing that information because I feel it's important that when we're advertising outdoor careers, there are two agencies that kind of get overlooked. And there are outdoor career opportunities out there, it sounds like. Quite a variety of them, according to what you just told us. So
Mm-hmm.
it's good to
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. And the biggest difference really with reclamation versus the Corps of Engineers is the Corps of Engineers is more construction based. So they have they call them the sappers, and it's when you're in the big army. When you're enlisted in the army, you can go to sapper school, and that's a combat engineering school. So you have people like that, and then the civilian engineers, and so they're the ones that build the dams, that choose which river they need to to dam up to use as a reservoir. So that's the biggest difference is Corps of Engineers is more about the building process, but then Bureau of Reclamation is the wholesaler of water and more manages the water and also the hydroelectricity and all that. Like the Hoover Dam is a Bureau of Reclamation dam. But I think the Corps of Engineers built it. And the same thing with New Maloney's that's near me, which is a pretty big dam as well. It's just not concrete. It's more what they call an earthen fill dam. So it's looks like a giant pile of gravel from afar, but it's actually really huge rocks. And so that was built by the Corps of Engineers back in the 70s, but it's managed by Bureau of Reclamation.
Well, we've really covered quite a bit, Katie, and I really appreciate you taking the time to, share this information with us. But is there anything else that you would like to share that might help folks out in obtaining an outdoor career?
Well, one thing I would add is, if you're don't feel satisfied in your job, there's probably a reason for it. And I remember having a job right before I got my federal job where I would sit in a windowless office all day and I couldn't even tell what the weather was doing outside or what time of day it was, how much sunlight there was. I would pretty much go the whole day without seeing any of the outside. And that was just depressing. And for some people that's okay. That's their path. But I wasn't satisfied with that type of position. So I strived to do something else. And like I said, I didn't give up. And these jobs, I feel like with the federal service, are extremely fulfilling because you're helping not just the public currently, but you're helping future generations and you're doing a big service. And I feel like with a lot of federal positions, you're doing a bigger service than you realize. And that's part of what makes it so fulfilling. And I'd say don't forget to ask for help, whether that's, a service like Life in the Wildlands, or if you know somebody who knows somebody that works in federal service. And, don't be afraid to ask questions because it is a daunting process, and anybody that works in the federal government knows how daunting of a process is. And I think probably 99% are willing to help you and willing to answer questions. And, if you're interested in applying at a certain location, especially if it's, in fire, they like to talk to you. They want to get to know you. Call the station that you want to apply at, if you want to beforehand and get more knowledge of the area, what kind of response, what kind of calls they get, I should say. And just don't be afraid to ask questions and don't be afraid to ask for help.
Well, folks, that's all the time we have today. Thank you so much, Katie, for sharing your story and all the helpful information for folks that might be wanting to pursue an outdoor career with a federal land management agency. And thank you to our audience for listening with us today. Stay tuned for the next episode where we will be talking with Chelsea Morgan, a botanist on the El Dorado National Forest in California, who will share outdoor career opportunities with the agency, how she got a permanent position with the Forest Service, and will share advice for those seeking a job with a federal agency. See you next time.